Just testing my microphone. Can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, I would like to call the public forum for the Des Moines School Board to order for Tuesday, March 2nd. Ms. Jenkins, can you please take the roll?
Mr. Barron,
Here.
Ms. Bradley,
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson, I see you on Terry, but I
see
don't
you.
hear you. Mr. Cody,
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle, Ms. Martirano,
Here.
Ms. Sawyer.
Here.
We provide speakers at the forum an opportunity to address the board for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the board agenda. If anyone wishes to speak during this forum, please email aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. Speakers will be called individually, and we ask that they please state their name and address prior to providing comments. Student speakers do not need to provide their address. Guests of the board are encouraged to speak to matters relating to the program, services, and operations of DMPS. Please remember that Iowa law prohibits us from discussing specific employees or their job performance. Please avoid references to personalities or character attacks, as those types of comments do not contribute to the purpose for which this public forum exists. Thank you for your support of our school district. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the public forum is not a time for board engagement and discussion, as it is our obligation to discuss only matters posted in the public agenda for the sake of transparency and opportunity afforded to all community stakeholders. Matters requiring attention will receive appropriate staff and/or board follow-up at the time after the meeting. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do. Brandon Oliver.
Hi, my name is Brandon Oliver. I live at 3021 Southwest 29th Street, Des Moines, Iowa, 50321. I want to remind the board and Dr. Ahart that I'm speaking because I love to grow with this district and I want to see us grow more. And I want to thank those of you who have been open to conversations with me. In the days of slavery and in the days of Jim Crow, and unfortunately still today, there's an idea that exists of the so-called help. Malcolm X often talked about the remnants of slavery. The house slave was close to the master, but never owned the house, never in line to inherit the house. Instead, the house slave was used by the master to make sure all the field slaves were happy enough to not run away. Keep them working here instead of working elsewhere. Let the master stay the master and don't let the house collapse unto itself. The current model of urban education in our community is run by a disproportionate number of white males in high positions of power. The core and extended core curriculum leads are mostly, if not all, white women. And the equity and inclusion teams, if not white, are often treated as so-called help. Good enough to help those with power, but not granted a position to run the house. At the end of the day, who gets to make the yes or no decisions in DMPS? I question what the plan is for us as a district to dismantle racism in our power structure. What is the plan for our administrators and curriculum leads to reflect the demographic makeup of the students and community we serve? What is the plan? Not the intent, by the way. Intentions are only as good as the actions that follow. No, what is the plan? And what is my responsibility to help? Because I can't find it anywhere. I've found no such plan on our district website. The board goals don't reflect this type of plan. The current management limitations don't show a push for change, and they even allow for stagnation. They're reactive as opposed to proactive. On the district website, I can easily find current student demographics. I can find demographics of staff from 2014, but I can't find current staff data. Why? Have we not made enough measurable progress over the past 7 years to publicly show on the website? In the board governance policies, if the language is changed to be positive and equitable action oriented, then the school board can support and motivate the superintendent
30
toward
seconds.
making equitable changes amongst staff. autonomous growth rather than limiting pain. I ask again, what is the plan? Or is our current reality the agenda indefinitely? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Dan Twellmeyer.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So my name is Dan Twellmeyer. My address is 3308 Stanton Avenue. First, I just want to thank you guys all for serving on the board. I'm pretty sure it's a volunteer position, and you guys take a lot of heat over certain things. First speaker noted. Something's kind of crazy, but I know it's a service and a sacrifice, and I thank you for that. I don't agree with a lot of decisions that are made, but I know that you guys are sacrificing dinners, family time, etc. And if I had an idea, I really think that instead of, if you can't pay you, I think it would be great, since lawmakers are downtown, that there should be a tax credit for those serving on a school board at the minimum. I don't care what amount it is, but there's got to be something to help you guys out for the time you guys give. Speaking about giving time, I gave some time a couple years ago on the Superintendent's Facility Advisory Committee. In short, that is the committee that dealt with the save dollars for the next 5-year plan of 2021 to 2025. That plan was submitted, I want to say it was the 2019 July, I think, meeting. And not in that plan was a stadium for DMPS. A few months later, Bill Good and Tom Ahart presented a proposal for that plan. And you guys are talking about some new numbers because Tom wants to scrap the bids that came in. There was a $300 million needs assessment that initially took place that Bill Good developed through support people at the different schools. And in that numbers, there were North, Lincoln, and Hoover had estimates for repairs for the stadium needs. When public forums were happening about the new stadium, the question came up, what does it cost to repair these stadiums? And I found on the website that the cost, the answer was it's $60 million. And it's kind of funny. That's $20 million for a new Roosevelt Stadium, and then putting all the money in to give a similar experience what this new stadium is going to be at the other 3 stadiums.
30
So
seconds.
it's kind of, and I'm going to continue on to the next meeting if I have to put pause. But the problem with that is that's just like, hey, we're going to give you guys all Lexuses. Well, we don't need a Lexus. We need a freaking Ford Taurus, and we just need to repair those. So that total number is $19.7 million to repair all those stadiums. And that number, I think, is a little high because we don't consider sweat equity in that. So you guys need to back up and just take some time to do some real due diligence. Those numbers never came out. And that is a lot on you guys for not doing one step towards answering the public's question. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we have no other speakers.
I would like to thank our speakers for their input this evening. I will now close the public forum, and the regular school board meeting will reconvene momentarily. Okay, we will go ahead and get started. I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Ms. Jenkins, can you please take the roll?
Mr. Barron,
Here.
Ms. Bradley,
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Cody,
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle, Ms. Martirano,
Here.
Ms. Sawyer.
Here.
The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So
Move
moved,
Caldwell Johnson. Second.
Martirano.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Martirano. Ms. Jenkins, please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. Approval of minutes. The next item on our agenda is approval of minutes from our meeting on Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Sawyer, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Sawyer. Ms. Jenkins, please take the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on the agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please email aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks. Those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any speakers?
We do not.
Ms. Sawyer, I believe you have the consent motion.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $4,379,978.00.
Is there a second?
Second, Caldwell Johnson.
We have a motion by Ms. Sawyer and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Are there any discussion or questions? Dr. Ahart, could you speak to item C14, I believe it is, about the stadium? I know there's been some news reports by that. I wanted to give you a moment to just speak to that.
Yes.
Oh, you're
we're
muted.
delayed. Oh, sorry about that. Yes. From the original timeline of the stadium project, putting bids out was delayed for a number of reasons, as I think most of the community is well aware. When the bids came in, they were over what was an acceptable package for us and for Drake for the stadium to come in at the cost that we promised the community. So there's a couple of reasons for that. Inflationary costs, as well as tariffs, have sent the cost of both concrete and steel to increase dramatically over that period of time. And presently, with the amount of construction happening in this area, there's a labor shortage that also likely impacted how the bids came in. So our team and Drake's team are working collaboratively right now to value engineer the project to remove some of the need for some of the elements that would impact both labor as well as concrete and to a lesser extent steel. But the basic stadium project would remain as we've portrayed it in the prior months. So the idea is for us to go back out to bid early next month. So we would experience a 4 to 5 week delay, still with the anticipation that fall 22, maybe not right at the beginning of the school year, but sometime in the fall of 22, it would be open for business.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. Are there any other discussion or questions? Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes, but I just want to verify, did we receive a second on that motion?
Yes, we did by Ms. Caldwell Johnson.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Yes,
The consent items are approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is E1, third grade reading monitoring report. We will be having our monitoring discussion. It will be facilitated by my board colleague, Ms. Martirano. And so you will see for the next few board meetings that our monitoring conversations will be facilitated by some of my board colleagues as we are growing and learning in our student governance framework that we are committed to doing. So I would like to, Dr. Ahart, if it's okay to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Martirano to get us started with our discussion this evening.
Certainly.
Thank you. As a board, it is our responsibility to listen to community voices, set a vision, monitor the district's progress towards achieving that vision, and make investments that support the vision. To monitor progress, the board will spend time during board meetings reviewing specific data specific to the goals or management limitations that we've set. Progress monitoring is an opportunity for the board to ask questions to help us understand whether there is alignment between our vision, our goals, management limitations, and our reality, the current student performance and growth. To understand whether we are making progress, we will ask, does this reality match the vision? Is there growth towards the vision? Is there a strategy and plan sufficient to cause growth toward the vision? We will analyze data by student groups and ask specific questions to help us better understand the needs of our students. This review of data will better inform our decision-making as a governing body when we review policies, budget, and other district initiatives. It is important to emphasize that the board, or as the board, our role is to set direction and vision and monitor the district's progress towards achieving that vision. This means it is the superintendent's role to identify and implement strategies that will result in progress towards each goal and management limitation. We will be responsible for holding the superintendent accountable and consistently monitoring progress in public. Each monitoring report will be specific to a goal or management limitation. The monitoring report will have data that shows how we are doing compared to the targets or goals we have set for ourselves. We will review all of our data by student groups to ensure we are tracking progress for all students. We will focus on student groups by racial demographics, economic status, students with special needs, and our English learners. You will hear board members asking questions to understand what is working and where there are gaps. Some specific types of questions you will hear us asking will include who is struggling, what gaps exist between student groups, what do we need to know about what's currently happening, why is it working in one area but not another, how do we plan to support a specific student population, how do we know our strategies are working, how might changes show up in a future budget to support strategies that are working. These types of data will help us better understand the equity and learning environment and opportunity for our most marginalized students. which will allow us to make more informed decisions related to budget, staffing, and other key policies. We will have a discussion of conditions and solutions. The goal is to better understand the temperature across a large system of what conditions are currently in place and what solutions are we exploring moving forward. So as we begin, to help everyone follow along, please indicate what page number and progress measure you have a question regarding today. Today we are reviewing data for Goal 1. The percent of all third grade students on track in reading will increase from 52% to 72% by June 2023 as measured by FAST. As the facilitator, I will ensure that we have a clear understanding of the superintendent's evaluation of our progress as a district specific to Goal 1. To capture key action steps that the superintendent will implement towards progress, to progress towards Goal 1 by our next monitoring report. Capture information on specific actions coming in the future that the board can anticipate, such as approval of contracts, budgets, or policies to drive progress on Goal 1. Identify any follow-up from today's session that the superintendent should bring in preparation for the next review of Goal 1. Additionally, I will keep time and ensure that the conversation is focused on the data specific to Goal 1. So let's begin. Looking at these data, currently the superintendent's evaluation is non-compliant for Goal 1 and below target for all progress measures included in the report. So I will begin with who is struggling the most, Dr. Ahart.
Our kindergarten class is clearly struggling the most, and you can, if you want to take a look at that, which is on page 2, I believe. Sorry, it's on page 2. If you'll take a look at the dark blue line, which is the annual data. If you start on the left, back in the fall of 2016, it's kind of an up and down pattern, and then with the last measure taken last year, exceeding the target by a little north of 10%, and then we had the COVID break, and when you see the two measures for fall 2020 and winter 21, there with the shorter blue line with the red squares on either end, this paints a pretty drastic picture of the situation that we're in with our kindergarten students. Our trajectory was on a really good upward trajectory, and as you might imagine, having lost with these early readers, it's so important to have that regular contact, having lost about a quarter of the year last year, and then being in some version of either hybrid or virtual for most of the time from the beginning of this current school year through this last testing window, we really suffered in the progress that we made with our kindergartners for a lot of reasons tied to virtual learning, as well as I would also note that our kindergarten class is significantly smaller. We've not broken down exactly what that would have done, likely would have done for these overall numbers, but suffice it to say that we're moving in the wrong direction. And that's pretty much the case across the various groups of students as well.
Thank you. I welcome my board colleagues to continue with questions they may have.
Tom, I do have a quick follow-up of what you were just saying there.
Yeah.
Is there a plan to do that kind of demographic study of which kids kind of opted out this year? I'm curious to see who stayed home.
Yeah, we're actually, yeah, that's a really good question, and we're actually working on that right now. Something that we'll touch on a little bit in the work session with the budget is we're actively trying to identify those students that redshirted, as they say, this year, and how many of those will be coming back, and a part of that will be identifying who they are, the demographically who they are and how they would fit into this picture. We're not there yet, but we will be looking at that and trying to determine the characteristics of that group that opted to redshirt a year.
Thank you. And I'd just like to remind my board colleagues that we want to start with the who, what, and why questions and hold off on those future orientated questions until we've identified the true populations, what's happening, why it's happening, and then we'll transition into more of the how and what does the future state look like.
So I have a quick question. So Superintendent Ahart, you mentioned when asked who's struggling most, you said the kindergartners, but the data shows that we haven't, I mean, we saw a dip in progress for our first graders and our second graders. So can you tell me what help is going to be provided to the students who have not been proficient at FAST assessment? And I guess that's probably more of a how question. So I will save that question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yes, I caught it as I asked the question. Okay, so I will pass for now and save that for later and look at my other questions. Thank you.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson, you had a question?
I did. This is really going back to the reference to the kindergarten measure for all kindergartners. What do we know about the number of students that either did or did not have a preschool experience within the number of students that were included in this measure?
I am sorry that I don't have that broken down that way. But I will get that. That's an important question, and one unfortunately I'm not prepared for tonight. But a very spot on question.
I do have a question. I'm referencing page 5, where it says 15 out of 38 DMPS elementary schools met their individual target for the fall of 2020-21 school year. My question is, what is happening in the 15 schools that you see is working and that could be implemented in the other schools?
So we're trying to determine exactly what the why is, and it varies a little bit from building to building. But one theme that we're able to lift out is that the 8 of the 18, and this isn't specific to each of those 18, but a pattern among those schools is more consistency in the modality of instruction. So students that started virtual and stayed virtual and didn't go back and forth between hybrid and virtual as often is one theme. The degree to which another one is the degree to which building level leadership and staff were able to provide timely intervention consistently for those students that most showed need for that intervention. There was a struggle with that and coordinating, having to do to some degree with the size of the building and how much flexibility there could be between the virtual staff and the in-person staff. So that was not as that process of providing interventions was very, compared to previous years, erratic, I guess is the word I would use to characterize that. But those schools that were able to provide more consistent intervention and more consistency in instructional modality tended to be the ones that were in that group of 18 meeting the target.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that one? Because I think In the measures where we identify elementary schools that have met the individual targets, I wonder if there is any correlation that can be drawn in the schools that met the target and the number of low SES, or how the racial demographics break out in those schools. That could be an indicator of challenges that we have either with students in poverty or any particular racial or ethnic minorities.
I have not done that analysis, but certainly one that we can do. I will, on a, not to rabbit trail, but in several conversations that I've had with some of our elementary principals in the last couple of weeks from non-title buildings, there was the wanting to understand why, if my building qualifies for title funds, why don't we receive title funds? And this is really an educational point for everyone. Title I is designed to provide additional support to students in poverty. If a building, if a school, an individual school has a population of 40% of its student body that qualifies for free or reduced price lunch, they are Title I eligible. However, when we receive our Title I funding, we have to fund every school that we fund. We have to fund at a certain minimum level. We can't take all the schools that qualify and divide the money on a per pupil basis evenly, because they require a certain level of spending, and we never get enough title dollars to serve all the buildings that actually qualify for Title I. And as the poverty rate increases, that problem is exacerbated, because we have schools that for Des Moines appear wealthy, but in other districts would be receiving Title I. But because of the nature of concentrated poverty, we just don't have enough dollars to go around. The other thing that's been problematic for all districts that receive Title I is that we now have to budget our Title I on an actual dollar cost, and that's made it difficult to provide the level of intervention that we would like to provide by adding extra staff, Title I staff. And just to explain that real briefly, because I think this is a really important point, how we used to budget Title I, we would budget it equitably on a per pupil basis, but we would cost FTEs at the same rate. So we would take an average amount for each, for the cost of a teacher, and subtract that from the amount that a building would receive. We're no longer allowed to do that under ESSA. So now we actually have to calculate the actual cost of the teacher, not an average. So if in my building I have a veteran teacher, with a master's degree, lots of experience, lots of years in the district, and takes family insurance, that teacher is going to cost more Title I dollars than Shashank's building that has maybe a 2-year single teacher who costs quite a bit less. So he may be able to afford 2 FTEs, while I can only afford 1. The only way to fix that is to access that teacher or change that teacher's assignment in my building, and try to hire 2 less expensive teachers. So in my case, if I have a really good interventionist and I don't want to lose that person, and I don't have enough dollars left over to fund another position, then I still have these dollars which have to stay in my building, but I'm limited in what I can spend those dollars on. So it in an effort to be more equitable at the federal level, they've actually made it much more difficult for individual school districts to serve our students in poverty with those dollars as we could if we could use our prior method. Maybe more than you wanted to know, but it's an important point, and the question legitimately comes up quite a bit.
So I have a question, and it kind of goes back to one of Terry's, the point that she had made. So when we look at the data, we can see which groups are struggling most. There are two groups that tend to be at the higher end are Asian kids and white kids. Pretty much everybody else is struggling. What gaps do you see that exist between those various groups? Sorry, Terry, I'm gonna mute you. Thank you. But what gaps do you see that exist between those student groups? And why do you believe those gaps exist?
One important gap is poverty, the relative poverty rates of those different groups. Another is the relative ELL rate of those, that exist within those groups. And then the third, which may be the most important, is the rate at which those different groups attend a high quality preschool before entering kindergarten. Because as we've seen over and over again, the preschool program pays dividends not just for those students in kindergarten, but continues to pay dividends for those students moving forward beyond third grade. And those would be the factors that most impact where they are at the end of each of these grade levels.
And Dr. Ahart, relative to the very first page of the monitoring report and the goal itself, the rate grew about 1% from fall to winter. Mm-hmm. What does that tell you in terms of how you might have hoped or thought it was going to grow from fall to winter? What does that tell you about what happened over those couple of months?
It tells me a couple of things, and this is informed too by lots of conversations I've been having with our building leadership teams. I can't tell you how excited staff were for the 5 days a week and how they feel like they're really getting traction, and how they're better able to serve when we're out of the hybrid, which was probably the worst scenario instructionally. Most of our buildings are better able to provide more consistent interventions, even for the virtual students, when they're able to have a much cleaner routine, with 5 students being, with all students who are in person being there 5 days a week, all the students who are virtual being virtual 5 days a week. You can run a much cleaner schedule, much more consistent, and not stretch our teachers quite as far. So that's one thing. It tells me that we have not had enough time with our students. And so I can't say that I'm real surprised, although the one thing I will point out on that question is, if you look at page 1 that Mr. Barron just pointed out with the third grade FAST results, and you note the short blue line, this year's data, it is unfortunately well below what we had established as a trajectory last year. However, there is a slight uptick. Kindergarten that we talked about earlier clearly is going in the wrong direction, but the first and second grade both show a similar trend or initial trend as third grade does. So what I would suggest is that this shows that even though it's not exactly at each grade level the same angle of trajectory as we saw last year, at second grade it's about the same, maybe not quite as good. First grade, it's actually climbing a little bit better. None are at the level that we want them, but I think this is a good indication that what we can hope to see in the spring should be significantly better in terms of a steeper incline of the benchmark data as compared to the positive trend that we were seeing last year. it was really difficult to anticipate what we would hope to see because just things were so different this year. And the first administration of the fast was, felt like the first time they'd ever taken it for our students, because especially for our very young ones who had only been through the cycle less than a year, had never been through a full cycle, and then missing the last administration last year, and then starting the administration later this year. We weren't even sure how much confidence to put into that first fast benchmark data. But I guess I would say that it shows that probably it was pretty accurate, and our teachers are very clear, and building leadership's very clear about what needs to happen moving forward. I'm not really sure I answered your question.
I was mostly seeking your response to the data. I think it's though we're not talking future-oriented stuff. I appreciated the note that you think that the slope can increase in the next report, and I do hope that's the case, and I think that's something that we'll all be watching for and hoping for.
For sure.
As I look at page 2 and review the students that are not meeting the benchmark, the populations that, and Kelly referenced this earlier, but our populations in greatest need are our special education students and our EL students. And you had mentioned earlier that you felt that the learning modality and the in and out was a large cause of the dip that we were experiencing for the entire population. But I'm curious, with our special education population as well as our EL learners, we prioritized these populations with bringing them back earlier, providing them an opportunity for in-person earlier. What do you feel is different, or why do you feel that these students are struggling more than any other population that we see here based on the chart the supplemental data on page 2?
The students with particular challenges, special education, ELL, one of the things that our teachers need and our students need, obviously, is the ability to really get to know these students, personally, to more personalize the support that they receive and deliver that support in a manner that's effective to that student. And we weren't in a position to do that as well as we normally are able to do, moving through the virtual and hybrid modalities. Virtual, not so much if they were consistently virtual, but everybody was stretched pretty thin, and routines changed, schedules changed. So it really does speak to the value of a student, the school team knowing the individual students, the ability of our special ed teachers collaborating with the gen ed teachers, as well as the English language learner teachers, and really personalizing the approach for each student. And then being able to actually deliver that intervention in a more personalized, way, which can really only happen most effectively when you're in person. So that's part of it. Another thing teachers will tell you too is just even for the students who are in person, trying to maintain physical distance and having the masks, etc., as barriers also lessens the degree of impact that they feel like they could have under normal circumstances, and that's particularly true for those ELL students.
Thank you.
I have another quick question here. So it's easy to talk through, I mean, pandemic, COVID, we just had an odd year of how we brought kids back to school and how we've moved through this school year. Given everything you know and looking at the data, would you say, I mean, the fact that we are not meeting our benchmarks, would you 100% say that as COVID, or what other circumstances would you say align with why we're not where we had hoped we would be?
Well, I can't speak with as much confidence with the kindergarten class, because the kindergarten class is always a bit of an unknown, more so than the other grades. And so kindergarten, a lot of what happens in kindergarten depends on how many of those students were in preschool, as Ms. Caldwell-Johnson had mentioned earlier. So I don't have as much confidence with what would have happened with kindergarten, but the plan that we had in place, in addition to the EL curriculum, which students and staff are responding very positively to, and if you look at what had transpired over the course of last year, I was very confident that we were going to stay very close to on trajectory at first, second, and third grade, and not quite as confident with kindergarten, just because of all the unknowns with every incoming kindergarten class. So I think that in the short time that we've had in-person instruction, some of it compromised because of hybrid, I'm feeling actually more confident now than I was a month ago, now that we have this second benchmark data, because although it doesn't show a lot of growth, it does show that we're turning the corner and starting to go back uphill, which is where we need to be doing. We just need to be doing it faster. So I'm confident that when we're able to have everybody together, and clearly the buildings know what they need to do, and their biggest frustration, frankly, is having been away from students as long as they have and not having all of them together in the same room. So yeah, I would have every confidence that we would at least be on the same trajectory that we had mapped out when we set these goals initially.
I'm sorry, that wasn't really the question. Let me reframe. So would you say the fact that we are not meeting benchmarks is 100% to blame on COVID? If it
Yes,
is,
I would say
then
it's 99%. I would say 99% of it is COVID.
Is
yeah.
COVID. So there are no other factors or indicators that you can align with or see in the data that might give us reason for us not meeting our benchmarks.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to go back to page 2. I asked questions earlier regarding our special education population and our EL population. Not far below are our Black males. And I know in our next meeting, we will be reviewing a report entirely about our Black males in their literacy growth. But I would like to lift up that this population too is struggling, and in the past our response has been the EL curriculum. So can you tell me how excuse me, we're not there yet, not the hows. I can catch myself. What do you feel is impacting our Black males most when it comes to their achievement in literacy?
Excuse me. The lack of routine and getting into that rhythm of school has not been healthy for anybody, not the least of which would be our Black male students. Not having the physical proximity, not having the relationship building in the same manner that we can when we're all face to face, is a huge detriment for for that population, and certainly has slowed our progress, or basically eradicated the progress that we were making with that group. So that is really, I think, the single biggest issue is not having that personal contact, but probably more importantly, that routine, getting that rhythm, having that reliable, this is going to happen today, I know it's going to happen tomorrow, and being able to have that real-time feedback and instruction, as well as intervention on a very consistent basis has probably been the single biggest factor in slowing down the progress for this group. That's a group that we knew we needed more focus on, hence the goal that we have that the board wrote, and one that we've invested, teachers invest a lot of time and energy and effort in and focus, and not having that regular rhythm, being able to give that that constant regular feedback in person, that encouragement that can happen can best happen in person, has really slowed the progress with that group.
I turn to my board colleagues. Do we feel that we have a good understanding of which students are at greatest impact or concern, the circumstances that surround the data, and the phenomenon that is happening? Do we feel comfortable with those items? Right. Well, I welcome us to move into the next phase of the monitoring, which is asking and looking forward and looking for response to these data. So Kelly, I will turn to you. I know that you had a future orientated question earlier.
Thank you. So my question is really around what help is going to be provided to students who are not meeting our FAST goals, which is the majority of our, or like a strong percentage of our students. What's the goal? What's the intervention strategies?
Well, this part doesn't count as intervention, but just getting into that regular rhythm 5 days a week is going to pay off considerably. We do have additional time because of the makeup plan, time. So we do have additional instructional time for these students, and so we're because of staff, we continue to have a number of staff in quarantine, and so substitutes continue to be a challenge, and so we're still compromised to a degree in how effectively we can do the normal intervention process. We're bending over backwards to make sure all of that happens as effectively and without interruption as possible. And we are designing 2 extended summer school sessions this summer that will be available for a full day. It won't be a full day of instruction, but it'd be a full day of service, so that it's really genuinely available to all families, with transportation provided, so that students can get intensive work on literacy, and then also math. And they could do 1 session, they could do 2 sessions, and essentially be in school virtually the entire summer, with a short break at the end of the year, short break in the middle, and a short break prior to the regular school year starting. That's the single biggest thing that we need to do, recognizing that we lost really valuable time that we kind of paid for twice, because not only did we lose that progress, but the summer, the summer skid, or however you want to characterize it, just got extended to over twice the length of what it normally would have. And you can't really intervene your way out of that. You really need to recreate the time. And so that's what the attempt is going to be this summer, to provide very focused support for both literacy and math for an very extended period of time. So when our students finish the school year this year, if you count their virtual time, they really will have received somewhere in the neighborhood of, depending on the grade level, and I can't remember how it breaks down, but at elementary, they'll be receiving somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or 16 additional days of instruction compared to another school district because of the extra time that we're putting in. So that's going to show some dividends. But the real big impact that we need to make is actually having more instructional time, uncompromised instructional time with our fantastic teachers to make up for lost time, for lack of a better way to characterize it. So we lost time last spring and then had a bit of an extended summer. And so the starting spot was way behind and we were in way less than ideal conditions. So that was an awful lot to make up for. I'm very encouraged about where we'll be in the fall because of the opportunities that we can afford to do with our ESSER funds to actually at least make up for the lost time, if not maybe exceed beyond that.
I have a question. How do we, and I'm referencing back to page 2 where we're talking about students that are not meeting FAST. How do we get students who aren't meeting FAST to attend a summer program? Where I heard you mention we're going to have some summer sessions, and has there been any thought given to, if we notice that the students that need to be there aren't showing up, have we thought of ways that we will be reaching them?
Yeah, we have given that some thought, and we're still giving that some thought. The first thing that we wanted to do was ensure that there weren't any barriers. So if we can provide a full day of school, essentially, not that they'll be in class the whole time, but a full day of service and meals and transportation, we think that's one of the biggest barriers for students participating. We will be initiating a marketing campaign, but if in the event that the board asks in this conversation what they can do to help, as that's one ask that I do have of the board, is to help spread the word with our community that it's really important that students take advantage of these opportunities. We lost time that couldn't be helped last year. Now we have the ability to make up that time. And there's not a way to make it up later. I mean, we can, but the more timely students catch up, especially those little ones, the ones that we're talking about here, the payoff is tenfold in its magnitude, because it is much easier to make up a relatively short gap now than to let the gap maintain and then start with a larger gap the following year. So that is just crucial that all of the students, that actually all those students that you see in that table on page 2 that Ms. Martirano just referenced, all of those students not meeting, we would like to see at least all of those students, and all students will be welcome. But we would like to see at least all of those students participating in our summer school opportunity. And I hate to use the term summer school, but it is school in the summer. But we're going to try to make it, as fun and engaging as possible, but it'll provide just hugely valuable opportunity to make up that lost time and get lots of positive momentum going into the fall of 21.
With FAST and the state requirements, if a student is not meeting benchmark in one session, they are considered at risk. And then if they are not meeting again in the next session, they are considered persistently at risk. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the students that are at risk and persistently at risk require progress monitoring via the state's guidelines and requirements in FAST, correct?
I'm not sure if the state actually requires it, but that's something that we aim to provide intervention for every student that is at least persistently at risk. Our goal really is to provide intervention for every student that demonstrate at risk in any given administration of the assessment.
So my question is regarding the reality for a teacher, and what does this look like in a classroom when I have upwards of 60, 70% of my students are now persistently at risk? How is it that I'm prioritizing who in fact is receiving that progress monitoring and intervention requirements?
I might tap Kelly Schofield to give a more specific response to that than I would be able to give. Is Kelly on the line?
Yeah, I'm here, Tom.
Thank you. I can't see. My screen's too small to see.
I understand. So, Kim, so you're asking, what does it look like in the classroom to do the progress monitoring, or what would the intervention recommendation be? Can you clarify again just what you're asking? Sorry.
Yes, my concern is, if we looked at last winter and we were looking at the number of students in a classroom that we were progress monitoring, I'm based on these numbers that we're looking at now, a much higher percentage of students is going to require that progress monitoring and intervention that we're speaking of. So in my, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the standpoint of standing up in that classroom and being a teacher and facilitating those interventions and that progress monitoring, what is the reality? At some point, we've got to prioritize, if I have to progress monitor my entire classroom, what does that look like?
Right, okay. Yeah, I get that. The state does require that you progress monitor and provide an intervention for your persistently at risk students. I think what Dr. Ahart was referring to is that we are really trying to get away from that word require, because it's not about the requirement, it's about what the student needs. So if a student is persistently at risk and below grade level, we certainly want to provide interventions. And if we're going to provide an intervention, you have to progress monitor it, or there's no point in providing it because there's no way to know if it's effective. So that's one thing. Yes, so when we look at the data, and this is what we've been working with schools on for the last several years, if you look at your data and more than 65% of your students fall below the benchmark, then you need to look at more of a class-wide response or a class-wide intervention, meaning everybody needs something more. So you're going to add that to what you normally do for everyone or most everyone in your class. Of course, you're going to look at some of your students that may not need to engage in that. So an example would be in a certain subtest, if 65 to 70% of your students did not meet the benchmark for sight words, you're going to add a sight word routine, a 5-minute, 10-minute sight word routine. Could be sometime during the day. So we work with class grade levels with schools to say, let's, it might be a class-wide or it might be grade level wide if the whole grade level fell below. So we're going to intensify. We're going to add this routine 5 to 10 minutes a day, and then or twice a week, whatever that is decided based on the deficit skill, and we're going to progress monitor that. And so we're going to try it for 6 weeks. Did that get us the results we needed? So that you're not planning individual interventions for every single student or group of students. You're doing something class-wide. They do have to be progress monitored. So, and that takes about a minute per student. And many schools figure ways to have their interventionists or others to help with that if it becomes problematic. But many of them do it in their skills block rotation. So once a week, you're progress monitoring that group of students. And so if the teachers are doing it, they're hearing more and getting more information that drives their instruction moving forward. So does that answer your question?
It does. So if I'm hearing you correctly, we are providing kind of a classroom level core enrichment for at the very minimum, all of our kindergarten students based on these data.
Yes. Well, yes. So we're intensifying the things that we're doing. If you look at the data now, and we do have our kids back the 5 days. So we're really looking at getting back into those routines that we knew and those strategies that we knew were getting us progress when we left in the spring, and then intensifying, right? So to really, still giving them grade level instruction, because that's the most important thing. Like, we need to be sure that we're getting grade level instruction, but then giving them class-wide responses on top of that. We're really working also with schools to think of that idea of ensuring that if you are pulling intervention, that you are working that intervention towards grade level, even if the student's behind. So how are we using that grade level text or that grade level skill as the anchor and scaffolding up to that? Because we don't want to get into like an intervention mindset. And then we're back to the issues that we had before the pandemic. And we want to be sure that we're talking about grade level all the time and accelerating towards grade level. So it's a lot of conversations. It's new. This is not something that we've all dealt with before. We were really making some progress in the spring, and people were feeling really hopeful. And this, has really been something that we have really been working with schools on, not to revert back to just pulling small groups all day for intervention, because that's not going to get us where we need to go.
Thank you. And then with the extra time in the school day that we've added on based on our instructional time that we're making up, are we prioritizing, or what's being prioritized during that additional instructional time?
So it would be those foundational skills and reading literacy across the board. We're prioritizing literacy and math across the board, but in that additional time, we're prioritizing foundational skills. So trying to fit in some of those short routines that are doable during a 15-minute, students coming into class, or a lunch period. Like, what is actually like doable and appropriate during that time. So it's those short routines that work on discrete skills, and that's the priority right now. Like transitioning in all different times of the day, like where can we squeeze in some time to work on those foundational skills.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I did have just a real quick question, just in follow-up to Dr. Ahart's reference to the extended learning that we're going to provide this summer, which I believe is going to be voluntary. We can't require anybody to participate. But I also wonder sort of the more long-term view of this, because obviously, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever the time is in the summer is not going to get every student where they need to be. I think it will help us to close the gap a little. But I think that my question really goes to sort of what is the longer term view? So if we know that we've got some fairly significant challenges due primarily to COVID relative to not meeting our benchmarks, do we anticipate that if funding is available, or if we can pull some rabbits out of the hat, that we might build in some additional interventions even next year? Because I don't think that we're going to see the huge increases that we need to see in order to get, back on track. But I think the longer we can invest, the greater the opportunity will be for us to really create sort of this sustainable plan for getting kids where they need to be. So can you talk just a little bit sort of about your vision for what you see happening in a longer term beyond just this summer?
Unfortunately, we've approved the calendar for next year. That was one opportunity, but we didn't know by the time we had that developed and had it vetted by all the different groups. It was a little late to revisit that. However, that does not prevent us from doing a few things. Offering additional time, and that could take place in a number of places. It could take place on Saturdays. It could take place extending the school day having an optional extension to the school day. It could be providing opportunities when normally those are their days off. Spring break would be, an example. We do think, and we have, we don't know, Shashank and I actually talked about this today. We do have some additional funds, we think, ultimately coming to schools through the package that is being entertained at the U.S. Capitol right now. So we think that the summer plan, if we do it right this summer, would be something that we would do also again the following summer. And then depending on what the spending timelines are, and what the data tells us, having the possibility of an extended calendar, perhaps just an extended calendar at the elementary level for the following year. Because the time is really what obviously is what the cost is, because you're not just you're running staff, which is the biggest cost, and you're running transportation and food, nutrition, et cetera. But legitimate use for those funds is to make up for what was lost during, what was an additional cost from COVID. And that's where we have our target set on all of that funding. So I agree that this summer, although I think we can do some very solid work this summer is not going to be enough to get us to where our students would have been starting the fall of 21 if COVID hadn't happened. So that will get us part of the way there, and I think stabilize things and lift up, the most discrepant, but it won't get us all the way there. So that is going to be, and the two biggest challenges with that, assuming funding, which I'm feeling actually pretty confident about, is going to be recruiting staff who are willing to work additional time, to work, to extend their year, to extend their days. And then what Ms. Bradley had referenced earlier, ensuring that our students are actually going to take advantage of those opportunities. And so we're still looking for the right hooks for, selling that message. But it's going to be critical, not just for this summer, although the summer is first and foremost, but moving on through the additional opportunities that we'll be able to provide for about the next 2 years, we think, that won't do us any good if we don't have access to the students. And so it's going to have to be a really strong marketing campaign with our families to ensure that we take full advantage of the resources that, the one potential bright light from this pandemic is being able to hopefully allow us to progress beyond maybe where we would have been otherwise. But that's only going to happen if we can get our students in front of our staff for longer than the typical calendar provides.
Thank you.
Future oriented, I've just been thinking about a couple colleagues in your notes on preschool, and I was just looking at the data that we provide to the State Department of Ed on enrollment and what we provided for this year. It appears as though we lost about a quarter of our typical preschool enrollment this year. If you assume that, maybe part of what is happening with the kindergarten numbers right now are the fact that a lot of kids didn't have preschool in person from March until they started kindergarten in August, and we have a quarter fewer students will be coming in with a preschool experience next year. My question is, can we do something this summer to specifically target the 4 to 5 year olds that's age appropriate, that meets the needs of their families, and what would that look like?
Yes, we can, and we plan on doing just that. I can't tell you exactly what it would look like, except to say that we feel it's really important for our families to be able to have a full day experience, so that they can so that their work days aren't interrupted and they don't have the transportation challenge and juggling daycare, et cetera, et cetera. The option of a half day if that's what works best for the family, but the full day, a full day option. It will have to look different for that population that you just described, and I'm not sure that I can speak to meaningful detail, except that it would look very different from what the first, second, third, fourth graders would be getting. Um, there would be play for sure, because that's some of what they missed. All those things that build those socialization skills, that build the ability to do school well, and then those basic skills that they just lost out on developing, had they not had their kindergarten and preschool experiences truncated by the pandemic. But yeah, definitely, that's the whole spectrum is what we're planning for the summer. Which I might note too is, even though this hasn't specifically come up, but it's an important question, is for those families who think that their child would be better off repeating a year, just because they just know that their child isn't where they would have hoped for them to be at the end of the year. We're putting a little bit of a different process in place so that we can make those decisions equitably, and help families understand, outside of the experience with their own child, kind of what the general tenor of the situation is, but certainly allowing some flexibility for those students who feel like, or families who feel like, a repeat year may be in their best interests. That looks a little bit different for this coming fall than it looked like in most years, and so we want to make sure that we're high and tight on a process for that. We don't see a lot of that happening, but certainly the question is coming up here and there, and we expect that to continue. So we will be addressing that on a consistent basis and a personalized basis with every family for whom that question arises.
In the response to data on page 7, you reference implementing high quality curriculum, and you reference that full implementation has not occurred, and we have 97% of our schools that are at full implementation. When will we be at 100%, and what does that look like from the standpoint of resources needed to be fully implemented?
From a resource perspective, really the biggest thing is buying time for professional development. We had a hiccup in what would have happened with our EL implementation due to, I'm sick of saying this, but due to the pandemic. We took a lot of the existing professional development time that was built in through the year very strategically, and front loaded the year with that, in large part to ensure that we had some teacher capacity to address not only the mitigation efforts that needed to be employed this year, but also the teaching in the virtual environment, learning those tools and strategies. So we had to sacrifice something, and what got sacrificed at this level largely was both the EL professional development, as well as to a degree the IM professional development. So we have some makeup time to get to take place this summer, this year to a lesser degree, through the rest of the school year. But there's just not a whole lot of time available due to the changes that we've made in the schedule and the harvesting of the professional development days to use on the front end. So we'll be making that time up largely over this summer as well. And so we could expect 100% implementation by the fall.
So this particular action item, we won't see fulfilled until the 21-22 school year and the first reporting progress monitoring of probably that October timeframe when we report on this the first, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we'll continue to work toward that, but I wouldn't say that we would be at 100% by the end of this year.
I'm curious again about the summer program. We talk about bringing down barriers and all that. If a family, a student or whatever was interested in doing a summer program virtually, maybe they had a really good experience virtually this year, is that an option that we'd be willing to entertain? Have we thought about that?
Yeah, we have thought about that. We don't have all of the the details ironed out yet, but we do think, judging at least from the last survey data that we had from our families, that there is likely going to be a significant number who would want to participate virtually. What we will be in a position to do, though, is to have that be a clean, right? I don't know if that's the right word, but a clean virtual environment. In other words, if you were teaching virtually, you would only have students who are virtual, so there wouldn't be the teachers wouldn't have to be managing, two different modalities. That's one luxury, I guess, that the summer opportunity will provide. So yeah, we do anticipate there being demand for that, which we will meet.
Do you feel our teachers have an appetite to continue in a summer school or continue teaching over summer school? I feel that the teachers I've observed and talked to this year are perhaps at the point of a loss of appetite. And perhaps that's not all of them, but do we feel this is a large quantity of students that we are going to actively recruit to participate, and we will in turn need a large number of teachers to facilitate said teaching. So where do you feel we're at with our volunteerism, not volunteerism, our willingness to participate?
Right. We don't have a good gauge for that right now, but we do know that we are not going to expect teachers to volunteer this year, especially because I put myself in their shoes and I think, man, I'm not sure I would have the juice to go, another whole number of weeks. So we're going to try to provide some options. So, teachers could teach both sessions or just one session. So if they want to take a break at the beginning of the summer, and kind of get their feet back firmly planted on the ground and then do the second term, or vice versa, or they could teach both if they want. We will be paying at a higher level. We don't have all that determined, but we're certainly going to be paying more generously than we have before, in hopes that will help make that decision a little bit easier. But that's very much the concern. The two concerns that I have, I'll speak for myself, for our summer program to be successful are, number one, ensuring that all the students that we want to access the opportunity actually take advantage of that opportunity, and then number two, having sufficient staff to come back and ply their trade again. They will be half day sessions for the teaching part. So it'll be so if you sign up to teach for a 7-week term, it would be 7 weeks of half days of teaching, because the other half would be daycare for the students, which I guess I failed to mention. We will have, working with Metro Kids, we will be infusing some of our math and literacy in the daycare portion of the day as well. Not as intensely, but we're going to align so that we get as much value as we can out of that time relative to the SMART goals. But yeah, that is a huge concern that I have right now.
Madam Chair, I'm wondering if at some point we could devote a work session just to a discussion of the plans for the summer program and ways that that's going to be provided, and any other just general information that might help inform the board on ways that we can help market and support that effort.
So I believe that we can.
Do my board colleagues have any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to.
Oh. Okay, I would like to just note that this particular report that we've all been reviewing does have a draft watermark on it. And I don't know if that was intended to have a draft.
It was not intended.
Okay.
I apologize. I forgot to remove that from,
Okay.
from the PDF.
Sounds good. So if my board colleagues don't have any further questions regarding this report, I will turn it over to you, Madam Chair, to proceed with acceptance. Okay. Madam Chair is having some difficulty with her microphone, so we are going to be transitioning, and just throw something at me, Dwana, if I'm not saying this right. We are going to be transitioning away from voting to accept reports. Voting yes or no on reports. We are going to transition to accepting the report that's been presented to us. So albeit these numbers are not ideal, and the fact that we are not compliant and below target is not ideal. But if you are, in fact, if you've received the information that you feel is necessary to have identified the population, if you feel that we have proper information to show that there is a strategy and a plan in place to sufficiently cause growth towards the vision, then I would invite my board colleagues to accept the plan. I believe it is going to be all those in favor is an aye rather than a formal yes vote. So we would like to unmute, and if you're okay with me asking that question, Dwana, all those in favor of acceptance, say aye.
Do we
Aye.
need a motion?
It's not a vote.
Oh,
Well,
didn't we just vote?
this is why the chair should be asking these questions. So I'll turn to you, Vice Chair. The intent is to not vote, but to.
So, but would it be I mean, this is essentially a voice vote and not a roll call vote, right?
Still a vote on the record.
Yeah. Okay, we will go ahead. Thank you all for your patience. I got completely kicked out of Teams, so that's what happens when we're using technology sometimes. We will go ahead and just take the roll call vote to accept the monitoring report, because that's the question that we're asking. I think we've seen the report and we just need to have on the record that we accept the report. So Ms. Jenkins, could you take the...
In that case, we will need a motion in a second.
I move that we accept the monitoring report.
Is there a second?
Second, Cody.
So, Madam Chair, just
Yes.
a quick clarifying question. So we are accepting the report as non-compliant. Okay.
Yes. Yes, we are, Ms. Caldwell-Johnson.
And to paraphrase what I heard Ms. Martirano say, we're accepting that he provided the information as we directed, that he gave an evaluation as we directed, that he met the expectations for providing the report. We're not voting up or down on the qualification of that report. We're just voting that he met the district met the expectation for providing a report as the board would reasonably accept. Is that all correct?
If I may, if you'd look at the superintendent's recommendation as it's worded there, might be helpful. The superintendent recommends the board accept the third grade reading report to all students before the providing evidence for compliance with the reasonable interpretation of the policy 401 Act. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but.
No, I think
that?
Tom, what page are
Tom,
you
what page are
referencing?
you referencing?
Just on the board docs, the actual agenda item.
My agenda.
And I believe too that Mr. Barron has stated this correctly too. When we do our monitoring report, which I know we didn't go through these steps on the before side, but we're looking at those 4 questions. Does it clearly show what is being monitored, which specific policy, end goal, or interpretation? Does it clearly show data for the 3 previous reporting periods? And does it clearly show the current reporting period? Does it clearly show the target reporting periods? Does it clearly show the superintendent's evaluation of performance? And does it clearly show supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's evaluation? If the district is off target or the superintendent's evaluation indicates implementation is off track, does the monitoring report clearly describe any needed next steps? So those are the things that we take into consideration when we are accepting a monitoring report. Does that clear up any questions that we have? All right, so we will be voting to accept the report. I have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Mr. Cody. Ms. Jenkins, will you please take the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson,
Pass.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 5-0-1 for pass. Sorry, Ms. Caldwell-Johnson passed. The next item on our agenda is E2, proposed new agenda order for board meetings. This is just a discussion item only. If you've had the opportunity to take a look at a new proposed agenda, Kelly and Kim and I are a part of our Student Governance Framework Committee, and we're going through and making sure at this time that we are aligning everything to our conversations in relate to students. And so this is a new proposed agenda that we have that we'd like to have the discussion about tonight. And if there are any proposed changes to that, we can get those made so that we would be able to vote on this on the first meeting in April and implement it that second Tuesday in April. So I would ask my board colleagues if you have any thoughts or suggestions or questions concerning this new proposed agenda that will be answered by myself, Ms. Martirano, and Ms. Sawyer.
My main question is about the placement of the public forum. Is there a reason to move that to the middle of the meeting instead of putting it on the beginning?
Yes, the reason is that we would like to prioritize the monitoring of our goals. And the reason why we want to prioritize the monitoring of our goals is because these are our true priorities that have been identified by our community voices. We've set this vision and we've set these goals, and we want to not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk and show that these are the highest priority items for us.
I understand that, but I'm just wondering about the practicality of if there happens to be a thing when a dozen kids want to come talk about, I don't know, we built that pottery studio a year, 2 years, whatever. we're going to have them actually come and sit and wait an hour and a half before they get their chance instead of just doing it before business?
That's currently the proposal, yes.
Branching off of what Kaylin said, and I raised this with Dwana a few weeks ago, I would probably have two challenges to this agenda. Generally, I like it. I think there's logic in putting the board report at the beginning. However, I wouldn't put the district recognition after the board report. District recognitions are largely students. Families come, they bring their child to the meeting to get recognized for getting a trophy for a debate or for track and field or what have you. You know, they plan their whole night around this type of thing. Yeah, they probably got other kids they got to feed and get down to bed. And so, you know, we have no idea. We just spent over an hour on this particular board report. We don't have any idea when those conversations are going to end. I would think it'd be good for the sake of the families that are coming to our meetings for district recognitions to be recognized, to have that at the front end of the board meeting. That way there's some time certainty for those folks. The second point I would make is we're planning, there's assuming a start of 6 p.m. Technically that'd be 15 minutes then later than when we typically start the public forum. If we're going to put the public forum within the board agenda, why don't we start the meeting at 5:30 so that we're done sooner and that we're working through maybe more alert and better prepared time, and it's a, you know, it's a half an hour start, so it's somewhat, it's a little bit more logical than a 5:45 start would be. So those would be my two thoughts on this thing.
And if I could just interject about the district recognition, if you were not at the monitor or the work session with us with AJ, and he lifted this up last week with us, where he referenced what some boards do in that district recognition is not around getting a trophy about debate. I will tell you, in the year I've been on here, I've never experienced a district recognition. But what he said is use that time to highlight your goals. So come in, you know, have a student come in where you highlight the impact of our goals and the work that we're doing to achieve our goals, and have them talk about how we're very grounded in this work and what that work means to our students. So that district recognition may be a little bit different than celebrating a trophy for whatever that honor may be for that student. So I just lift that up of looking at district recognition might be a little different than maybe it has been in the past. And I definitely hear you with the earlier time, because it's something that we even had like a brief conversation around, and so want to take that into consideration as well.
Madam Chair, as I was sort of looking at this, and I know this has come up before over the course of time as we've sort of attempted to migrate much more closely to alignment with a student-centered focus. And I applaud everything that we're attempting to do, but I do think that the public is one of our biggest constituencies. And to the point that Kaylin and Rob made, sort of embedding them into an agenda that is really going to require more of their time and attention, in my opinion, doesn't really reflect back on, you know, the why behind inviting them into our space to either share questions, comments, concerns, or even when we're lifting up students. I think that district recognition, the way it currently exists, is still important for recognizing the accomplishments of our students. And there's no better place to do that than for the board to extend that opportunity to lift up the wonderful things that are happening. I agree that moving the time frame to 5:30 would give us the opportunity to do both the public forum and district recognitions. And then at 6 o'clock, moving into our regular meeting agenda would have allowed us to dismiss with sort of the formalities and the recognitions early before we actually get into the agenda. So we're not really sort of trying to mix the two in a way that may or may not make sense. So outside of those two things, I love moving consent to the end, public hearings, all of those things. But I would definitely carve out that 30 minutes prior to 6 o'clock for both district recognitions in their true form, the way we've always done them, and the public forum. And then if we want to invite students into our space to talk about how they are impacted by our SMART goals, et cetera, we can still do that. But it doesn't take us so far afield from what historically we've done in terms of district recognitions to require that we do it sort of a different way that for me doesn't quite make sense. So I would advocate for a 5:30 start, combining district recognitions and public forum in that 30-minute time frame, and then moving into our regular agenda. So in essence, taking out C and D from the proposed agenda, moving those to 5:30, and then proceeding as you've listed it.
If I can speak to those recommendations, the public forum is something that we've always had in our meetings, and it is an opportunity for the community and students to come and speak. However, it's not an opportunity to actually interact and have a conversation and for us to give feedback. So it is the hope of the governance committee that we create space for our community and students and parents and teachers alike to actually be able to have a conversation with us, whereas the public forum as it currently exists is very much one-sided and doesn't provide a true conversation, collaboration, and interaction with anyone that's participating. So I think that was one of the reasons why we decided to move it, is because there is plans for more interactive and collaborative communication with our community. And the district recognition, I'd like to still keep it in the regular meeting for that reason as well, because I would still like the opportunity to be able to interact with students as we're celebrating their achievement, whether it's a group of Black males that are achieving in algebra or third graders that are meeting their benchmark in FAST. I believe that if it's in public forum, we won't have the opportunity to have that interaction. So I would like to keep that in the regular meeting rather than outside of the regular meeting, so that interaction can occur.
I don't think you're wrong, but I think you're conflating two different things here. Like sometimes a person just wants to talk about something that's not necessarily on the agenda, and to put that at some X unknown time in the middle of a meeting, that's going to take a real lift for someone to come and actually participate in that way. Whereas what you're talking about, I think, is directly talking about the math and the reading and whatever, and that person is going to be scheduled, and they're going to know this is my window in at the beginning of the meeting. I think those are two different public conversations, and that's why I would prefer to keep the window for just, guy on north side to come talk about whatever, and then no, I'm going to do this before 6 instead of sometime after, I don't know, 7:45 or whatever. I just think that'd make it very inconvenient for a lot of people.
Yeah, I hate to be, the get off my lawn guy here, but we have really we've stopped doing district recognitions for a handful of reasons, largely for the folks who are within their first year of service here, because most of the last meetings have been virtual and it's been really hard to do that, but also because some pressure to focus the board time appropriately towards the goals, and so I think we need to maintain that. I also think that we need to give time to recognize students and bring them into the board space, even if the recognition isn't the aligned with one of the 3 board goals. because we're a huge district. We do so many things on a daily basis, and there's so many reasons to celebrate those recognitions. Doing them at the front end of the board meeting, it allows folks to come in. We can say hi, we can talk to them. If it's a public forum and they speak before the meeting, and there's 5 or 10 minutes in between that time and the meeting starting at 6, we have that engagement with them. I don't think we're going to get that if we stack it at the end of the meeting. And I really want to make sure that we don't narrow it to just the board goal work, because I think there's a lot to value in there, and there's a lot of folks who come into our space even for one meeting a year that we should find reason to bring them in. If it's a 3rd grader and then it's a 9th grader, and in between then you don't get to see what they're doing or celebrate them, then we miss the opportunity. Plus, there's, in years past, I can remember county supervisors and Prairie Meadows coming in to present checks. I want to be respectful to their time. I think there's plenty of reasons to put that stuff at the front end of the meeting. I could see the logic on the public forum of, listen, if you want to talk about your thing, come and listen to our thing first. I understand that. I just think, I can see Terry and Kaylin's point about, okay, listen, but, we're inviting them into our space. We're giving them some forum. We can do it at the beginning. Knock it out. If they want to stay and engage, and some of them do, that's wonderful. But I just think I like it. I think you guys are going in the right direction. I really honestly do. But I like what Terry suggested of doing that stuff at 5:30 and then digging in at 6.
Madam Chair, I had just one other quick comment. And I want to go back to something that Ms. Mortorano mentioned about engaging with the public during our meetings. And I'm not for sure exactly what that looks like or how we create the space to do that. What I want to make sure we avoid, however, and this is not in any way suggesting or trying to be disparaging for my city council colleagues, but I don't want us to create a situation in our meeting where there is sort of this constant back and forth and feeling like you can't, sort of shut down a conversation when you're sort of 30 minutes in and you're talking about the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and people just keep challenging you back. So I think that as we think about this, 2 things come to mind. Setting time limits for the amount of time that we will consider and debate and discuss a matter. And then secondly, creating the right sort of rigor or guardrails for what engagement looks like with the public, so that we're not putting ourselves in a situation where either we are feeling the need to respond to an individual's questions that may or may not be appropriate at the time, but also feeling like we want to have the kind of engagement that is productive. So I don't know what that looks like, but I want to caution us from not getting ourselves in a position where we're opening up Pandora's box and don't know how to close it.
I want to thank you all for your thoughts and suggestions. What I'm hearing, which I think we all agree upon, is that the agenda, it looks good. I mean, the new proposed agenda looks good, and it seems like there's an understanding of the why behind wanting to make some changes. I think what I'm also hearing is that there's some things that I think we as a committee can go back to and have another conversation. That would be my suggestion, and kind of taking the thoughts and ideas of everyone this evening. And then I think the 3 of us getting back together, having that conversation, hashing through that, and then seeing if we can get something else together to provide to the board, because I do hear all of my board colleagues on this conversation, and we want to make sure that we take all of that into consideration as we're moving forward. So if we could, Ms. Martrano, Ms. Sawyer, we set a time to meet and have a conversation about all of the feedback that we've received, and then we could present something to the board of maybe via email before our next meeting. Great, thank you. We will now move to item E3. This is our board self-evaluation. This is also a discussion only item. We as a board have evaluated ourselves, and we looked at our student outcomes focused governance framework as a guide for just seeing where we are at as a board currently and where we see we could be in the next quarter. And what I would like to do is just have a discussion about what are some of the things you observed, if you want to speak to maybe some of the reasonings why you put things where you did. And I think what we'll do is just go through them individually. We'll start with visions and goals, and we'll just kind of work our way down, if that will work for everyone, and just have a conversation about your thoughts and feelings behind that. So if we could look at our visions and goals, it says the board will, in collaboration with the superintendent, adopt goals that are student outcomes focused. And we have the options of not student outcomes focused, approaching student outcomes focused, meeting student outcomes focused, and mastering student outcomes focused. So let's talk about maybe where you put things or where you believe that the board is at this time. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Sawyer.
No, I was just going to say, this is about the only, I think, in looking at my scoring, this is the only place I gave us any points, and that I put us at mastering.
Yeah.
Because we do have our SMART goals and SMART goal format, and definitely the mastering, that was kind of an interesting process, because how you run through this process, there are no partial scores. It is, you meet everything in the category or you don't. If you don't meet in that category, you go back to the previous one. So, but I definitely relied on, I was not here when the SMART goals were developed, but I rely on what I've heard from board colleagues talk about how they were developed, and that the items in mastering were certainly accomplished when those board goals were developed.
Okay. Anyone else on this particular section? And I think the one thing that always trips me up on this one, where I put us at a 25, was because when I looked at the next one, and I think it's that bottom one where it says the board relied on root cause analysis, that always gets me every time. And so that would probably be one of the reasons that I put us at a 25 for that. But I did see that a majority did put us at the 35 for that, for mastering. So that was one reason where I landed at for us being at 25. Any other thoughts on that section of vision and goals? We will move to our values and constraints, or if you are looking at your manuals, it has have values and guardrails. The board will, in collaboration with the superintendent, adopt guardrails, or we call them management limitations, in alignment with the goals. And here we kind of feel like we're probably all a little bit on the same page. We've got some zeros, some threes, some fives. Any thoughts or ideas about this one, for this particular one, values and constraints?
I think that this is one that we are working on currently with our policy recommendations and rewrites. The recommendation is we have, no fewer than 5. No more than 5. And it will allow for the board to be focused in their reporting. And the other item that's a requirement is to have interim guardrails as well. And that's something that we're lacking as well. So I think in our upcoming policy rewrite, we will be much more focused, defined, and also require those interim. And we will quickly be able to jump into that mastering column at the end of that process, which we're hoping to do in the next month.
Yes, I believe that we'll get into that 5 range very quickly. It was one reason why I left us just at a 0, because we are still in the process of doing some of those things. I believe that we'll get there fairly quickly. So I foresee that happening within the next quarter very quickly. And it seems like most feel that we'll be in that range or even a little bit higher when we're looking at the months of March through May. Any other thoughts that anyone want to add to that section?
The only thing I want to say is I've gone through the management limitations with that thought process in mind and filled out the survey. I don't see how we get under 5. I just don't, and without excising things that I think should be expected of a large public board. I mean, we could combine things for the sake of combining them and getting it to 5, but otherwise, I don't know that we necessarily make a better policy if we get it to 5 than at essentially 10 or 11 right now. And so that that's where I am, and I'm saying that so you all know kind of why I put us there, and that I like your optimism, and I just know you all got to carry me a little farther along with the optimism then.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Mr. Barron. I know, looking at our management limitations, we do have a lot, and I know that you and Dr. Ahart and I, along with AJ, have kind of gone through those as well. And so we want to get to those 5. So I know we as a committee will be meeting and working together with that, and along with working with AJ to see how we get to that. And we're gonna keep pushing. So we are optimistic that could happen, but I do know that there are some things that we do need to keep in our management limitations as well. I'm looking at accountability and monitoring. The board will devote significant time monthly to monitoring progress towards the goals. And anyone wants to speak about this section? I believe that we're getting there. I will say that it's always the percentages that get me a little thrown off on if we're really there or not. And I think we'll start looking at that to see if we truly are there. I know for myself, I put us in the approaching student outcomes focus just because I didn't quite know about that percentage of where we were at. And so that's where my thought process was on leaning us in that section. Anyone else?
I would say where I got caught up and why I put us at 0, and I don't know where I had us. I guess I had us moving a little bit forward. Is because it says that we're monitoring goals 4 times a year, and we're not. If you look at our monitoring calendar, it's only 3. And so I don't know if that's a conversation for us to have. I don't know where I'm echoing. I don't know if that's a conversation with AJ to talk through that. And I know why we ended up only monitoring 3 times this year, and it had to do with when we'd be able to collect the data. So I was like very prescriptive. This is what the policy reads. This is how I'm evaluating. And so knowing that we'll be building a new monitoring calendar before next year, that we can definitely, align that very differently. So that was the one hold up that I had on this one.
And that absolutely makes sense. And I know that we had a conversation about that. I think Mr. Barron and AJ and Dr. Hayter, I think we talked about that whole 3 times versus 4 times. And so I think that's something that we will look at. And I get being kind of going to the T on what everything says. And so I think that we had landed on maybe it not being necessary to do 4 times, if I'm remembering our conversation right that we had. And so that is something that we will look into, and I will reach out to AJ about that as well.
Yeah, that is the question was, especially for the reading goal, the most important metric is the FAST, and that's given 3 times a year. So we had that, if you remember last year, we had, one of the reports was kind of confounding because there wasn't really a fresh set of data. So we manufactured something because we're supposed to do 4. So when we had that discussion with AJ, his take on it was, well, then do 3. What's the point of, so at least that was my takeaway, Rob. So I don't think there is anything particularly magic about 4. I think it's, we decide on what it is, and then do we hold true to that? But is my understanding.
Yeah, and I think, that point and the one I'd raised on the prior section, it underscores a bigger question of just, do we just want to do we want to accept some zeros on some things, or do we want to amend the tool to fit what we're going for? Because actually, we meet things that are much farther, in the rosier side of the spectrum here, but for a couple of smaller things that could honestly just be technical, they could be stylistic, that don't necessarily make us a bad board necessarily. So we might want to reconsider strict adherence to this metric, or just accept that we won't measure up to it. But after a while, the problem with not measuring up to it over time is, what does that say to the district then if we're not going to measure up to our own standard consistently? So I think it's a question of how much we want to, whether we want to modify this rubric.
And
maybe it's a revision. Sorry, I was just going to say, maybe it is that revision of the tool. And if it's, like I said, I go strict, it's not like you run a red light, or you're at a red light and you're like, oh, no one's coming, I'll just run it. It's the red light. So maybe it becomes 3 as opposed to 4, just based on what our district needs are.
I just wanted, basically what Rob described is how I scored myself. Some of these, minor details that we didn't quite have, instead of giving us the 0, I gave us the tier 3, whatever that happened to be. And I don't know, this strict adherence to a grading tool was the same problem we had when we introduced SRG a few years ago. Was a kid would turn in a test, and half the teachers had scored a 3 and half would score it at 0.5. Nothing in that paper changed, except they were being extremely literal about what the standard said, and that caused that was a whole controversy for several years in our PLC, right? So we need to decide, do we want to stick to this by the letter of the law, or do we want to measure how well we're progressing? Because until we iron out some of these technical things, we're not going to see any progress based on this particular measure. Because until we can get some of the stuff that we are definitely working on, right? So the root cause thing, those whatever, you guys know what I'm talking about. I have it in front of me, but yeah, we're not going to see any kind of growth until we decide: are we going to follow this literally? Are we going to mop up the document, or are we going to just kind of go for the gist of it and see how we're growing?
I think that just like in SRG and, at the beginning of that process, teachers were asked to kind of calibrate where they were at in their thinking and calibrate the scoring. So that was very much a part of that cyclical process to ensure that teachers were on the same page. And so we as a team can certainly calibrate where we're at, but I am concerned about moving the needle. It'd be one thing if we were moving the needle and meeting our student outcomes, but right now we are not meeting our student outcomes. So, I struggle with the recommendation to move the needle when we are not yet achieving the goals that we've set forth.
I just want to say, I mean, the trick though is if we're not going to meet our own expectations, then how are we standing in judgment of a district not meeting its expectations as well? And so, because I agree with you, I really do. Like, you know, hey, you know, everything you say is absolutely right. But then the challenge then is, you don't do this. We've kind of done this off and on in my time on the board in different forms, and it always comes down to, well, you know, if the board's not going to live up to what it says it needs to do, then what is the student outcomes don't change until adult outcomes change, and that kind of thing. So that's just the challenge here, and I don't want to be hypercritical because you guys are doing a lot of work on this stuff, and it's good work. It's just, you know, there's a foundational question there that we probably as a 7-member group need to answer for ourselves.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't, I certainly would not advocate for being hypocritical by any means. But perhaps what it does mean is that our interim measures may need to be adjusted. So the goal doesn't get adjusted, but perhaps the measure or the progress measure gets adjusted so that it gives us an opportunity to monitor more frequently. And I'm just using the example of 4 monitoring reports per year, but certainly something we can sit down and discuss.
So I was just going to offer that we know what's required to change the way we're evaluating ourselves. So I think the bigger question is, what is our plan to get to the next level? What is our plan to be much more intentional about moving the needle for ourselves? Because, we could sit here and debate, the scores all day, but if we're not intentional about what we need to do to continue to move the needle, and I think some of that is the work that Kelly, Dewana, and Kim are doing currently, but I also think that there is more work that we collectively need to do as well. So I think being intentional about what that looks like and how we create the rigor within ourselves to get there is, to me, the bigger question and something that we just really need to tackle.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, because I believe most of you all know, but I am on the board chair cohort, and I'm currently working with other board chairs across the United States in this actual work. And I'll have several assignments during that time. And one of them is to actually provide a timeline for this board that I will be working with Dr. Ahart and of my coach as well, to create a timeline and talk about some of these things and how we do move the needle forward. So that's work that I'm glad you brought it up. I was going to bring it up kind of towards the end, but that's the work that I have that I must achieve as a part of being in this cohort. So I will be, my first task is to create a timeline on how to move us forward. So what we did is we took the numbers that I had selected for the board, that was part of the assignment, and my job will be now to create a timeline to move us forward so that where I say we'll land in March through May, we'll get there. Now, granted, my numbers are maybe somewhere not too far from everyone else's that talked about where it would be March through May, but you will see that coming from me shortly, sooner rather than later, that will start to push us towards that. I do agree. We know the state in which we are in right now, and I think what matters is how are we going to move this forward. And as I'm continuing to learn about this process right now, I know we are being very to the line and all the wording, all this, we're following it to the T. But I think that I will also take back the questions of to my coach, as well as, as a board, if there's some things that fit us, you know, how does this work? What does this look like for other districts across the United States that are doing the same work? So I want to make sure to uplift that as I'm in the process of learning this, but we will get to a point very soon where you will see a plan that I would present to all of you about the timeline of what we'll do to move forward.
And I just want to say, I'm not like advocating fudging our numbers or artificially inflating or anything like that. I'm just saying that the way the tool is right now, that simply by crossing a couple T's and dotting a few I's, these scores would come up substantially. And I don't think that really helps us. That doesn't give us much useful information in terms of what we're actually doing. It's just how much, or yeah, just which detail did we miss in level 0 to score a set of 0 or whatever.
No, thank you, Mr. Cody. No, I hear you all as we're going through this process. So I would like to open it up for any other reflections or thoughts on this in our evaluation. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to lift up? And how are we feeling about kind of where we've projected ourselves to move forward?
I just want to, when this was added to the agenda, I looked at where everybody's scores were, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm about where everybody was for the last couple months. And then I looked at where everybody's scores were for the next 3 months, and I was like, oh, yeah. That's kind of what I expected. And I'm not soundly pessimistic because I do not trust you all. However, I just look at the next couple of months as being the end of one of the busier sections of the board year, because of the budget, because of the evaluation, because of the next round of board reports. And so I just want us to be practical about what we're capable of doing in the next couple of months. And I appreciate that you're going to have a timeline for this stuff. I don't want us to be too ambitious so that we beat ourselves up for not meeting that. And I've been in this is my 8th time through these next couple months, and it's going to be challenging because we have a lot of extra board work facing us.
And Ms. Marchano, go ahead.
I do agree. It's a very ambitious task that we have ahead of us. The committee has been diligent about setting goals and aligning again timeframes with those goals. And we believe in this work. It is research based, and districts that are utilizing this framework are improving their student outcomes. And I truly believe that our students deserve the hard work that it's going to take. And again, I agree, it is ambitious, and it is, you know, the 3 of us are meeting all the time. But I am willing to do that. I think our students deserve it.
And I just wanted to add, Mr. Barron, yeah, I'm very optimistic about it. I think it's because of the training that I'm receiving that I'm really excited about, you know, pushing this work forward. And you're right, it's gonna be a lot. And I like Ms. Martrano, and I know Ms. Sawyers, we have our conversations. The thought of where we could be, it does excite us, and I know it's going to be a heavy lift, and it's going to be a lot. But I think what will really help is once I dig into this and work more closely with my coach and creating that timeline, I think that will be a help to visually see, like, you know, where we're going. And for me, I'll be stepping out this timeline by month. So there will be some things for March and April and May, and it pretty much takes us all the way through into August. So I'll be going through and just kind of leading us through that piece, and I'll be sharing those things with you as soon as we possibly can. But yes, this is definitely a heavy lift, lots of work, but I am very excited about the work at hand to move us forward. Are there any other thoughts? Anything else about the evaluation before we move forward?
If I could, and maybe it's just a question I would pose to my colleagues that are not currently engaging in a cohort where Dwana, Kib, and I are. If you guys have, I don't know where the heckler is coming from. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. If you guys have recommendations or thoughts or information you want to know, if you want to learn more, like, help share that with us so that we know, definitely the three of us are really intense in this work and want to make sure that you guys have the knowledge that you want and you need to feel comfortable in this work too. So I would just ask if you have recommendations, just to bring them to any one of us so that we can figure out how we can bring those skills and that learning back to everyone at the table.
Thank you, Ms. Sawyer. I'm not hearing anything else. We will move on to items of privilege. Next on the agenda, we have items of privilege. Do any of my board colleagues have any comments or anything to share? Ms. Sawyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple things. First, I would like to say Happy Social Work Month to all of our social workers on staff that are working with kids and their families, with our staff, either in classrooms or in the home environment or with our communities. I appreciate your work. And we're fortunate for social workers, we get a full month of March. So I celebrate you and just wish you happy Social Work Month. Secondly, I would like to lift up that CLAT does have our next legislative coffee scheduled March 13th, which is this Saturday at 9 a.m. You can find out more information on registering for that event at on the Facebook page, DMPS Community Legislative Action Team. And I believe it will also be on board docs as well. I know I sent that to Erin earlier and she said she put it up on the calendar. So we hope to see you on March 13th. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? I would just like to say a few things. As I've shared with you all that I'm myself, Ms. Martrano, and Ms. Sawyer, we are all I'm in the chair cohort for this Student Outcomes Focused Governance Framework, and Ms. Martrano and Ms. Sawyer are in the coaching portion of that, where they're learning that. And one of the things that as we've gone through tonight and we've evaluated ourselves as a board, I just took a little bit of time to reflect on myself personally as a board member and what I've brought to the table. And one of the things that we were challenged to think about and that we had great discussions about was about, I am the genesis of transformation. And we had to take a lot of time to reflect over ourselves and what we have or what we haven't committed to the board work that we've done. And I know a lot of times for myself, that process was hard. I don't like a lot of times to have to take a look inside of myself and reflect on myself and the things that I can do better. And I think one thing on being on this board, there were probably many times that I didn't ask the right questions. There were many times that I didn't push things, and I would use the excuse of being new or just not knowing what I know. And I just had to take a look at that and just for myself, just know that I want to do better as a board member, as a person serving on this board, as your board chair. I take this role very seriously, and I'm up to that challenge where it says that I am the genesis of transformation. That is what I want to be for this district. The work that we're about to embark in is going to be a heavy lift. We're going to have some conversations that are going to make us uncomfortable, but in this space, it will be safe for you as we are having conversations that are aligning to our students' focused governance framework. So I just want to challenge you all just to think about that and think about your role on this board, and if you would be able to say that you are going to be the genesis of transformation. And without anything else, I will turn it over to Dr. Ahart.
Just a couple of reminders to our community. The Iowa legislature is in its first funnel week this week, so there's a very, very busy 2 days left, Wednesday and Thursday, especially as it relates to how legislation will impact DMPS. So we talk about this a lot. It's important to remain engaged with our legislative body to ensure that our voices are being heard and that that our needs and our students' needs are being taken into account as they deliberate on legislation. The other note I want to make is that I'm tremendously proud of the discussions this board is having around student outcomes focused governance. It is tough work. It's a very different way of governing, and it's the right work, and it's not easy, and there's still lots of details that we have to work through as a board superintendent team, but I'm absolutely certain that this is the direction that we ought to be headed in. And I want to thank the board for its dedication and focus. As frustrating, I know, as it can be, because it never feels like we're moving fast enough, but these are the right discussions. And finally, I just want to recognize that we're at about the year anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic, at least as it immediately impacted DMPS. I think the board has done an outstanding job of keeping our students as the focus of all their deliberations. And I want to recognize the entire DMPS team for their flexibility and persistence and tenacity and dedication to our students through this most unusual 12 months. Thanks, Ms. Bradley.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. The meeting is adjourned, and we will start our work session regarding the budget very shortly.